While we're getting going, I thought, in a spirit of getting to know each other, we would do a short icebreaker. So here's what I would like. I would like people to stand up and form two lines in the front. Two lines of if we can make it equal people. And so we'll have one line facing the pews and one line facing the dais. And we're going to come down here and get going in the morning. Here's what we're going to do. Now, some of you might be like Mark probably knows everybody in the room, but if you look across, if you can make eye contact with somebody that you don't already know or don't know well, is everybody good? Does everybody have an eye contact partner? Is there and if you're just one of those social butterflies that know everybody, it's okay. It'll still work for us. Okay? Does everybody have somebody? I want you to sit down with that person and find out 5 things about them. I want you to find out their name. You might already know their name. The name tags are on there. Find out what their dream vacation is. Find out if they won the lottery, what they would do with the money. And find out where their hometown is. Okay, let's just do those 4 things. Okay? Is it good? Does everybody get it? Okay, you are winning $200 million. So, look, if we're going to win the lottery, we might as well win the lottery, you know what I mean? So let's start out doing that. So spend maybe 5 minutes each side, and then we'll get together again and talk about it a little bit, okay? So the next part of this activity is that I need 2 volunteers to come up to the front to introduce yourselves. From last night, what is the first principle of nonviolence? Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. I need 2 courageous people to come up here to be first. Who's going to do it? Come on up. That's part of the activity. You too, Rod. Okay. So Kate, I need you to stand here. And I need Rod to stand here. Okay, now, here's the catch. Kate, as she's going to introduce herself as Rod in the first person. Hi, my name is Rod, my hometown is this, I would do this, I would do this. So, and if she accidentally speaks in the third person, that's okay, we'll just start over. Okay? So she'll do that first. Now, the other thing is as Kate is introducing herself as Rod, all eyes are going to be on Rod. Okay? So we'll start there. Kate will introduce herself as Rod. You all will be looking at Rod as Kate speaks. Okay? Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Rod. I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. I really liked it there. Great beaches. But my wife and I were looking for professor positions, and she got a job at the UW here in Eau Claire. And when she accepted the position, or she was about to accept the position, she said she wasn't sure if she could accept it because her husband was I was looking for a job too. And so she They offered me the position when a professor was retiring at the end of the first semester. So that's how we both ended up here. If my dream vacation would be to go to Paris and see the architecture, because I am kind of a architectural history buff. That's my geeky side. And if I won the $200 million, I would buy a house for my mom, and I think my wife would like to buy a house for her parents as well, and we'll save up for college for our kids and so forth. Think that's about it.
Great. Great, thank you. Now, Rod will introduce, and will do the same thing. As Rod speaks and introduces himself as Kate, all eyes will be on Kate as Rod speaks as Kate.
Good morning, my name is Kate. I was born in small town Pecatonic, Illinois, which is in the northern part of Illinois. If I were able to win the $200 million lottery, I would invest a lot of the interest from those earnings and give it to multiple charities. I don't know which charities I would give the money to, because there are so many. And there are so many charities that do very, very well by people. If I were able to travel to my dream vacation, it would be to revisit Britain. Because when I went there the first time, I did not have a lot of time to really see the intricacies of Britain. So I would take my time, just kind of travel about. There are other destinations I would like to go to as well, but there's a lot of going on in those countries and places. So I would kind of defer from going there at this particular point in time.
We want two more volunteers to come up to do the same thing. Oh, okay. Okay. Ahmad will speak first. All eyes over here.
My name is Anisa Haq. I born in Isahak. My dream, if I win 2 million, I will make help for healthy insurance, like health insurance, but not health insurance like non-profit. She want to help the people if they go to a hospital. So number 3. Number 4, the dream vacation. I want to go to Jamaica, and that's a good place to take a vacation. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmad. Okay. Same thing. All eyes on Ahmad right now.
Hello, my name is Imad Ramadan. I am from Giza, which is part of Cairo. If I were to win the lottery, I would I would start a nonprofit organization to help people, and my dream vacation would be to go to the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it. So a couple things with this icebreaker. First of all, it's nice to get to know somebody that you didn't know before. But also, as activists, a lot of times we're asked to speak on behalf of somebody that has an identity that we don't have. So maybe for the people that came up here, how was that experience? Good? It was good. So a lot of times it feels like there's a heavy weight, a responsibility. It can be intimidating, and you feel a certain responsibility to accurately talk about their dream vacation or what they do with millions of dollars. That's all part of it. So what about this? What about the person that is being introduced, all eyes are on you. You're standing trying to figure out what to do with your hands. How was that experience?
If I can add to that, Jim, it definitely was an oddity because, I have this person who I just recently met, right, speaking about or talking about me. So it really places you in an odd position, and I was listening very astutely to everything she was saying to make sure that she got it accurate. And she did very good. Kate did very good, representing who I am, in that short period of time that I shared that information with her, which then, for me, validated, right, the authenticity of her as a person because she really took the time to listen to what I had to say and make sure, I'm trying, Mark, make sure, is that better? Make sure that I was identified correctly, which was powerful, and so I feel completely safe trusting her, right, to represent me in such fashion again. So it was an odd experience, but it was very revelatory for me.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if anyone else wants to share the experience.
A big part of this work, and something that's overlooked a lot, is active listening. And so I do this. I do this activity. This is one of the icebreakers that I really like. I do this activity a lot, and so people will come up and they'll forget, and they'll feel terrible, and the person that they're trying to introduce will feel terrible, and the whole experience is different unless there's active listening. And active listening, especially from people that have experiences that I do not have, that I will never have, it's important that not only do they feel heard, and like Rod said, that's empowering, but that I'm open to listening is really important. Now, how about this? Everybody had to do this. You were looking at the person that wasn't talking. And some of you struggled with that a little bit. We rely a lot on facial expressions, on reading lips, on looking at people, and so not being able to do that can be difficult. Look, I don't know about your parents. When I was young, my mom somehow, she thought it was magic. I would come home late, she said, "Where were you?" And I would say, "Oh, I was with Rick and his car broke down." And she said, "Okay, look me in the eye and you tell me that." Almost like there was no possible way that I would be able to lie if I was looking her in the eye. And so we're in the habit, in our culture anyway, we're in the habit of, as a sign of respect for those that are speaking to us, we look at them. And so the habit of looking at somebody can be hard to break. And you were asked basically to break one of your habits. It's also important in nonviolence that we're able to acknowledge and recognize our own habits, our mind habits, our heart habits, and be able to change those habits based on the information that we're learning. So that's in part why we're here. So if we're ready for the next part, I'll turn it over to Salika.
Okay, so pair up, and I want you to talk about 3 questions. And the first one is, why is King resistant? The second one is, why is Baynard Rustin insistent? And the third one is, who was left out of that whole conversation? Okay? So why was King resistant? Why did Baynard Rustin insist he had to let go of the guns? And there's one really important person here, because remember, his house has been bombed. He's been threatened. There's an important person here who's left out. And how do you feel about that person being left out? So they're making decisions for someone. So let's start with, why does King want to keep guns in his house while being nonviolent at the marches? And we're going to say that King is taking originally what is called the tactical position, which is that the marches are nonviolent, but there will be armed self-defense in his house. Does that make sense? Baynard Rustin is arguing for the philosophical position, which is that nonviolence, goes through everything. So why is King resistant to letting go of these guns?
I said fear for his life.
Yes, that's one. Who else is he fearing for? Bring it right up here. Yeah.
His family?
Yes. And is he fearing anything else? I mean, what does a gun represent in American culture?
Just, I want to talk about if we talk about nonviolence, I think it's not in nonviolence if I try to protect myself or protect my family. I mean, when you try to protect yourself, and I use a violence. So how I can don't use a violence if I want to protect myself? If I see some people try to get something for me or for my family. So I want to talk about something is logic. I can't say I'm not nonviolence. So I made this conversation with Mark. I think Mark remember that. So how I can nonviolence, and I leave the people give back for me or for my children or for myself. So yeah, so that's the problem for me.
Do you think that men in particular would have a problem with the philosophical nonviolence?
I mean, like when we discuss that to make a law, if you want to make a law, so you must be careful for that.
No. I mean, that we socialize men to protect their families. We socialize men to respond to insults and threats with violence, right? That, if somebody calls us a racial slur, we're supposed to hit them. And when you don't do that, is that seen as an insult to masculinity, to someone's masculinity? That you're not a man. Does this make sense? So for King, who is in this marginalized group that is often denied manhood, for a marginalized man, would holding on to the guns as a symbol of power become something even more important? Is this making sense? Because in other marginalized communities, you will see people do the same thing. Does this make sense? So what Baynard Rustin is asking him to do is to change his entire idea of a masculine identity, isn't it? Because, and for women too, if someone asks us not to protect our child, is this making sense? So I want you to start really thinking about the fact that here, guns are power. And nonviolence is asking you to shift to a different form of power. But it's also asking you to think about what that means. Why is Baynard Rustin so insistent? Because he's the philosophical guy, that nonviolence cannot include private self-defense. Remember, Baynard Rustin's a Quaker.
Well, I think Bayard Ruskin is saying that you can't live one way and then ask people outside to do a different way. You have to walk your talk.
And, I mean, he is, but he's also pushing it farther. That if you have the guns in the house, they will influence the way you think about it. Now, I will say personally, I'm more tactical. I live with a black belt. My husband's a black belt. So I basically have a tactical weapon in bed with me. But a part of his Buddhist philosophy is that the best fight is the one he's not in. So it's very much a last resort. But that's bringing us very quickly to that last question. Who is left out of the whole conversation? Who should be in it?
It seems like the whole rest of the movement was left out. It seems like 3 key leaders were making the decisions.
3 key leaders are making the decisions, but I want us to pull it even farther down into the grassroots here.
So I've been fighting the patriarchy since I was 5, so I feel a little impassioned about this. The woman that was most threatened, the wife, and the children were not asked. Violence of death and the threats of death would have been an end to the torture, whereas the man of the house would have probably just been murdered. The women would most likely go through extreme sexual abuse and violence before they were killed. The women were excluded from the conversation about whether or not to have that final resort of violence as a reaction to violence.
Coretta Scott King, who is the woman who is facing sexualized threats, and she's the mother, at this point, of a 4-month-old baby. Her house has been bombed. People are calling on their phone to threaten to kill her husband. There's been one attempt on his life. Yet she's not in the conversation, is she at all? Yes, let's...
But do we really know that? Do we know that he did not confer with his wife? Do we know that that was not a joint decision?
Yes, we have David Brinkley, who wrote this article, wrote the book, what is it? It's Parting the Waters. And he describes the entire scene. And Coretta Scott King said, yeah, she was left out of that decision. And evidently it did cause some friction. It took her a while to, shall we say, come around to support his position. So yeah, we do have a lot of evidence she was left out. And Ella Baker, who was the architect of the entire movement, was also left out of the conversation. Ella Baker. Now, she is a Quaker, too, but she's going to be the one who will guide the students in the sit-ins and the Freedom Rides. She is the number 2 at the Montgomery Improvement Association. She's a former NAACP field director. She really is that behind-the-scenes person making everything run. But even though she's going to have to implement this decision, she's not there. What does that mean for a nonviolent movement? And realize the majority of the nonviolent movement during the 60s was women. It were women and military veterans. They were the ones who had the discipline to be able to do it. How do we build consent for nonviolence? Is one of the biggest problems in the movement today that people make decisions for others and they don't often build consent? Does this make sense? I'm going to come back to the defund the police slogan. That's not a slogan the black community came up with. That's a slogan white activists in Minneapolis came up with. And what happened? A lot of pushback. Blue lives matter. All lives matter. Who bore the brunt of the pushback? Black people. I want us to think very strongly about what it means to work with people who are marginalized and to make decisions about nonviolence for them without them in the room. Does that make sense? We have to have the people who are impacted in the room. Now, what that means in some of our communities is we're going to have to go out and find them. Some will come to us, some will not. But we cannot make these decisions without them. So to try to keep us on time, I'm going to hand over to Jim. I'll skip the video, if that's all right. Do you want to move into the next part?
Sure.
And then after that, we'll do the trusted 10.
Sure. Well, so we're talking about different movements and different scales of movements, and of course, when we talk about conflicts, one of the big conflicts that we hear about all the time on the news is the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is multi-layered, very complicated, and certainly isn't, we're not going to totally understand it in 10 minutes. But there's some lessons to take from it. And just briefly, 1947, Israel was created by the international community as a Jewish state, displacing many, many Palestinians who are Arab Muslim. Right? So what happened? So first of all, now, as the conflict seems to be ongoing, a lot of violence today. There's violence happening today regarding this conflict. A couple key parts of this. First of all, when most of the international community, and just full disclosure, people like me are saying, hey, like in the West Bank, there should not be Jewish-only settlements. That seems to be against international law, against the Geneva Conventions, and morally reprehensible. What does the Israeli state say to that? Does anybody know what they're... So they say, look, if God willed us this land, and if we don't settle this land, we'll lose it forever. And so it is our moral and religious obligation to settle this land, displacing people, even as those of us outside observers are saying, immorally. First of all, does this sound familiar at all? Has anybody heard of Manifest Destiny? Manifest Destiny was the belief that God willed the colonists the entire territory, and it was their moral and religious obligation to settle and civilize the entire territory. It was propaganda to get people to move west, but it worked. The Homestead Act didn't work. The gold rush didn't work. One of the ways that people are manipulated is to say, hey, you know what? My God told me to tell you this. So how do we deal with people that stand against what we see as justice or morality when they're standing on their religion? So first of all, that's part of it. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's not talk about abstractions. In northern Minnesota,
Sure.
a Canadian company wants to make money, and it's going through indigenous land, and it feels entitled. And we do, as Americans, we feel entitled to help Enbridge make money because our religion is money.
Right.
And the people, the indigenous people, are still there saying, you are ruining our way of life, you're ruining our land. So it's not a religious endeavor, it's a money endeavor. And it's happening right now, and our police forces are mobilized against nonviolent indigenous people. So where it's not even religious anymore. It's like, of course Enbridge has a right to make money.
Sure.
So it gets harder to talk about when it's personal and it's not something across the world with religions that we aren't intimately involved with, but we're very involved with money and who's entitled to make money and who we as Americans think you can steamroll over to fulfill that goal. So it's religious in the sense that it feels we can't confront Enbridge.
Right.
So where do we go when we make it personal? This is happening today.
Yeah. Look, and first of all, if anybody tells you there's a silver bullet to any of this, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. These are multi-layered conflicts that have histories and complexities that need to be unpacked. So what does a moral economy look like, right? Can we have a beloved community that has capitalism, free market capitalism? Those are really big questions.
Jim, I just wanted to make a quick comment and to kind of piggyback on what you said. To make it even more personal, look at the debacle that's going on with the mask, right? And all the implications associated with that. And so as I was listening to you, I was like, man, she's spot on, because I was thinking about the discussion that we're having right now about whether or not to get vaccinated, whether or not to wear masks, right? And the violence that's occurring around that right now. Violence. Because people are choosing steadfastly, right, not to get vaccinated, not to wear a mask, and so on and so forth, right? So you made me think about that. Very good, relevant comment. Sorry, John.
Yeah. In the back.
You mentioned the word religious, and you was mentioned yesterday, right? I just can't help but think about that as an out of context. How can manifest destiny be nothing more than propaganda? How can the settlement and this concept of a chosen land not be more than propaganda? How can the Taliban believe that Islam is to suppress women? How can that be nothing more than propaganda? Because it doesn't exist in any of those religions.
Right.
Not even the concept of the chosen state, the chosen people. Chosen people, from what I've heard, they're chosen to be, for many reasons, to be tested, to be leaders, not to take over a land and occupy. So I'm really agreeing with you that this concept, what you call religious, could be, propaganda, money, capitalism. He's just using the term religious is
Right.
religious, people who are believers in a difficult state of defense,
Right. I agree 100% that the Taliban and their governance philosophy, I guess, has nothing to do with Islam. That the KKK puts itself out as a Christian organization, right? So using the context of religion seems to be misunderstood, right?
It seems to me that use of religion is a way that people can feel good about themselves for whatever it is that they choose to do, rather than being honest that it's related on money or grabbing power. I think that might be an explanation for why religion is the image that and the venue that's used to promote those kinds of things.
Right. I agree. I think it's fake moral righteousness. The other thing, and we need to talk about this. The other thing with that conflict, you may recall that in 1992 they came up with a two-state solution, the Oslo Accords. Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister of Israel at the time, Yasser Arafat. They had an agreement to end this conflict. And what happened? Yitzhak Rabin was up on stage singing a peace song with a Palestinian activist. And as he walked off the stage, he was shot in the head and killed by a hardcore Zionist for speaking out for peace. Understand that, we talked last night a little bit about, it's leaderless movements. Akpor in Serbia was a leaderless movement. All this, we talk about in part, leaders that are trying to change the status quo put themselves at risk, sometimes at grave risk. Now that's not us. Maybe it is you. And maybe in certain circumstances it's you, and circumstances it's not. But think about the most famous peace activists and their demise. Changing the status quo. Look, why do people try to protect the status quo when we obviously see that it's unjust, immoral, because they think that they get their power from it, they get their status from it, they get their identity from how things are right now. Whether that's free market capitalism and greed, or whatever it is, we have to go into this with our eyes open. And that goes to one of the principles of nonviolence: accept suffering. How much suffering are you willing to endure? And again, that is something that you should reflect upon daily in a movement. These are big questions. There's lessons to be learned from these conflicts. And it's important for us to understand the historical context as well as how the history is manifesting itself today.
I'm wondering about the role of misinformation in all of this. I mean, the persecution that I'm most familiar with is the persecution of the Baha'is in the Middle East. And a lot of it is their beliefs are misrepresented. And I'm sure that goes for many of these, conflicts.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. If you want, go ahead.
Let me follow up to what she just mentioned as well, and to kind of ask a different or similar question, right? How does that misinformation, right, exacerbate our ability to de-escalate conflict? Right?
And this is where we get into stereotypes and implicit assumptions. Because, all right, here I quote Kendi. Kendi says that the problem is not that people have the stereotypes and then they act. The problem is that people act to protect their comfort or to protect their power, and then they justify it. So those stereotypes that you're talking about, that misinformation that you're talking about, those are the justifications that are used to support the comfort. And one of the most, we talk about the biggest evil being indifference. The biggest evil is comfort. People will kill to keep the power, to feel that they are comfortable, to feel that they control the mores of a situation. Mores are unwritten social rules. Like the reason why we face forward in an elevator is an unwritten social rule. There's no real rule that says you have to, but it's an unwritten social rule. So the people we saw January 6th felt that they were losing their power. They felt anxious. The Taliban, when dealing with women in power, feel anxious and uncomfortable. All of these groups feel anxious when they feel like they're losing power. And they will kill to maintain their comfort. And if we look at the Arab-Israeli conflict, one of the things people never talk about is arable land. The reason why they're moving into the settlements is there's a lack of arable land. So the justification, they're bending religion, they're perverting religion to justify something when they really just want the arable land. Now they can invest in desalination plants, which they've done in some parts, but they're very expensive. So arable land, knowing what it is that's the actual power that people want. A lot of what the Taliban does, even though they claim it's religion, is they're going against ethnic minorities to try to impose their way so they will feel comfortable and they will feel not threatened. Afghanistan has a lot of industrial minerals, a lot of industrial resources. People don't talk about that.
So, but that also, King also lays out steps of nonviolent social change. Information gathering is the first, and education is the second, which really speaks to what I think you're bringing up. And a lot of times, how are we educated? We watch the news, we listen to the news. And if you watch our news coverage of the Arab-Israeli conflict, it's as if they have equal number of weapons, and they're just going back and forth somehow. They never talk about the fact that the conflict is happening on occupied territory. They don't mention that at all. And so it's up to us. It's up to people that are trying to change to really concentrate on that second step of education. I tell people, look, I advise a student group at Stout that is called LIT, Leaders Igniting Transformation, which is a student group that is developed based on the idea of developing leaders among our students of color. So we talk all the time about how do we move our campus forward. And look, I don't think our student body generally is a bunch of bigots. What I do think is that students, and of course it's a predominantly white institution, these students come to our campus, it never occurs to them that black and brown students or disabled students or LGBTQ students are going to have a different experience than they do. They don't even recognize that. And if they did, maybe I'm naive, but I really think things would change. And so it's up to us to listen to these communities, to hear their experiences, and change accordingly to make it more equitable and inclusive.
So I'm going to jump off of that.
Sure.
I have an exercise I want y'all to do, but I want to explain it first. People who have listened to me on Conversations in Color, and they're all on the YouTube, have heard me talk about scapegoating theory. All right. Yeah, I think scapegoating theory and how that works in human relations. And within sociology, in many societies where you have power differentials, they will choose a marginalized group that is percentage-wise small but large enough to cause discomfort to scapegoat. Does this make sense? And by scapegoating, that means stereotyping. And that means they can use disinformation that hooks into those stereotypes to manipulate the population. This is how propaganda works. In the US, that group that gets the most scapegoating are my group, blacks, because we are only 13% of the population. In India, it will be Dalits, who are treated almost exactly in that system the way blacks are. In Northern Ireland, it will be Catholics. Am I beginning to make sense? When Al-Qaeda invaded Iraq, it was the Yazidi. In Turkey, it's the Kurds. In Rwanda, it's the Tutsi. This is a part of a strategy that we actually trace to the Assyrians called divide and conquer. Rome will do it, Britain will do it, imperialism is based on it. If you have an all-white group, the scapegoating will be by class. And even within a monoculture, an all-black group, there will be somebody scapegoated. Does that make sense? Unless the culture refuses to allow the misbehavior. Why are people going to scapegoat? To maintain power. Now, that scapegoating is based on another idea that we've seen in military research, and I've done this research as well. This is my dissertation was a part of this in the book I'm publishing, and I've already published some of this. And the Conversations in Color people have heard me refer to this as tipping points. In a population, when certain marginalized groups meet a threshold, they will begin to be scapegoated. And members of the majority, depending on what their tipping point is, will move from their frontal lobes, which is where we have judgment and discipline and discretion, into the amygdala, which is where you just react. This is fight, flight, flee back here. Does this make sense? So, individuals have different tipping points. If you have a high tipping point, you have a high tolerance for being in the minority. I always say a white guy in the NBA has a high tipping point. I obviously have a high tipping point to be here. But you'll have whites who have high tipping points as well, especially people who travel if they're going places like Japan, etc. People with low tipping points tend to start stereotyping very quickly. And some people's tipping points are 0. So that means they see everything a group does through a racialized lens. I love my church at St. James. We have a couple of people with low tipping points for teenagers. I have a teenager, so I have a fairly high tipping point for them. They will see a bunch of teenagers at Oakwood Mall. And their tipping point will be breached, and a tipping point is like a fear threshold. Does this make sense? And they'll stereotype the teens. Even though all the teens are doing is just standing around or talking, they'll think they're louder, they'll think they're threatening, they'll think they're staring, they'll think they're casing the stores to shoplift. So they'll use these racialized stereotype terms because the fear makes them look at the teens through a stereotypical lens. Is this making sense? And that explains why some people will be okay with 1 or 2, but once you get to 5, they start stereotyping. It can be with college students. They're standing waiting for a bus. No, they're not. They're loitering and they're loud and they're screaming and they're this and they're that and the other. That's why you see people like the Central Park Karen, remember her? Saying she felt threatened, and the rest of us are looking at the video. What the heck is your problem? But her tipping point for black men is 0. Does that make sense? It's 0. So that stereotyped lens is based on this concept of comfort, which is when we feel that we're in control, we know the mores of the area, we feel like we have the power to be comfortable. And the fear threshold is activated by the anxiety of feeling uncomfortable. Does that make sense? And there are people in France who have worked in anti-terrorism. They have scanned the brains of people who were willing to engage in violence on both sides. When they talk about engaging in violence, they move into, using MRIs, they move into the amygdala. How do you get them to let go of violence? You have to move them back into the frontal lobes. Comfort levels are set by the people you're around. And the communities with the worst tipping points tend to be the ones most segregated. Because the less contact you have across race, the easier it is to have a low tipping point. Is this making sense? Thus, we come to this exercise. Do not turn the paper over. So it's going to be handed to you with the fold saying trusted 10. Has anyone in here ever done the trusted 10 exercise before? So this comes out of Oshkosh. I have permission to do this. The trusted 10 cannot be your relatives. They cannot be family members. You may have less than 10. You may have less than 10. but these are the 10 people you feel, we need one more up back here, I guess. The 10 people you feel closest to, who you trust implicitly. 10 people, no relatives, no spouses. So I'm going to go ahead and start. When you're looking at your trusted 10, and you're filling this in, did anything jump out at you? They're all like you? Well, especially, is it race or is it gender? Or is it both? Age? Are other people seeing that? Did anybody have a large number of diverse trusted 10?
But like only one person had the same education as me. Only 2 people had the same sexual orientation. There were like 7 women and 7 whites, but it wasn't everybody.
Okay. Anybody else? What are the differences? Yep. Go ahead.
At first glance, mine look like pretty much white, middle-aged women, but with one exception. However, it's not representative of who they are as people, just the chart, because the big commonality is each of them have overcome immense oppression and have driven through it. So although we all look like we could be sisters, or a brother, the missing parts of the chart are the why.
As you look at your chart, I want you to look at, these are your bubbles. These are your bubbles. These are the people you feel comfortable with. I want you to think, pair share with the people across from you. This is a group of 3 here. And Mark, can you guys be a group here? Why are these the people you feel comfortable with? As you put it, the missing part of the chart. Why do these people make you feel comfortable? And on the back, write that why down. So let's take about 5 to 8 minutes to talk about why these are the people who set your comfort levels. What did you think that your comfort with these people came from?
We had similar experiences and worldview, so we feel understood by them. We feel safe with them. They're very much within our comfort zone, and that they give us affirmation and respect.
We had different findings, so mine are quite different from me. Everyone has a different sexual orientation than I do, for one. And our worldviews are extremely different. Our religions are all different. So I don't have the same religion or worldview of any of my closest. But they're all sane. And I know people laugh at that, but I know that in my life, people who are crazy are attracted to me. And that goes back to me having a mom who's crazy, a dad who's crazy, and a sister who's crazy. So sanity is very important to me. They're non-volatile, meaning they are not prone to violence or extreme emotion. They're kind, and they're all good listeners.
So when you say sanity, you mean that they're realistic, or they're calm, or they're non-manipulative?
Yes, all of those things. Sanity, not narcissistic.
Not narcissistic,
That's
okay.
very important too. Yeah. Calm.
Drama-free?
Excuse me?
They're free of drama.
Free of drama.
They don't go looking to create havoc when there's no havoc happening.
Yes, I would say so, except when they're reminded that I'm different from them.
Okay.
A couple of them get, because they have different religious views and stuff like that,
Mhm.
they can be threatened.
But
Remembering that.
they don't just create drama because they're bored and it's Tuesday.
No, they're threatened that I exist.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's hit this group back here. Yep. And then we'll come do this one.
We were talking about the length of the friendships. We were talking about the length of the friendships, the similarity in values that we shared, that we felt respected, that we felt cared for. People listened to us and were responsive to our needs. Did I miss anything?
My English not good enough, so I'm sorry, but she talk what we talk about. For me, I wrote 5 person I totally interested in. We have the same sexual orientation except one. And yes, for myself, I feel safe and acceptable when they around me. We can share good times, and I have good advice from them. So that is really good to me. Thank you.
Safety piece, absolutely.
So I think we have a little bit of cultural disconnect as well with among our group of 5 that we have here. One of the things that really stood out was not being harshly judged, or in people that we've trusted in communication. The 2 cultural disconnects, I believe, Imad had blood relatives listed. And I think that, again, like I said, is a cultural disconnect about how you relate to people. And my daughter, she did not include people that she could have included because being ostracized by both sides of my family for many years, she's grown up with the concept of heart family. So people who are not blood related, she thinks our family and blood family has to become heart family. But all of her people are from Discord or some sort of internet, including Siri, whose disability is listed as only working with Wi-Fi. But even though it's flippant, it's very representative of our younger community of social activists and of our movement forward.
I both heard another person say it, and I thought to myself that none of them are 100% trusted.
Interesting.
My people were all like me. They have 8 of them have my religion. I think shared beliefs and experiences and non-judgmental was a big part of it for me.
My group had 2 men, but I also realized the homogeneity of the group. But I think what came for me is that these are all people I have developed relationships with over the last several decades in very close groups, 3 or 4 different groups, where we share a lot, we are open to each other, we know each other well, we feel very comfortable basically just being who we are and expressing our opinions about whatever we're reading. We read books together, we do lots of discussion things. And I feel like they know me, my foibles and my nons, and I know them, and I would feel comfortable going to any of them. And I think they would feel comfortable going to me, too, if they had something they really needed to talk about. And so I'm very, I think that's where my group comes from.
There was a comment in our group that the list sometimes could change over the years. I appreciate that. And I also had the observation that some of the people on my list, they might not put me on the list.
So I just have a follow-up question before Salika kind of takes back over, okay? And the question is, when you think about those people that you all have those commonalities with, right, who are part of your inner circle, if you will, how would you describe them in relation to the notion of a tipping point as it relates to your own tipping point? Their tipping point, right? Yeah, how similar, how dissimilar? I'm just curious because, you know, Salika kind of engages in this conversation a little bit earlier, right? About people who have a high tipping point, low tipping point, zero tipping point. So I'm thinking about those people who are close to you or you have a greater degree of affinity with. How would you describe their tipping point in relation to your own?
I'll speak to that because I think that where we do have lots of discussions and interaction, some people, I probably have a little higher tipping point than some of them. And I feel that, and I think that's a good thing because it makes me more aware of my tipping point. And so I think we do have, that is not as homogeneous as some of the other things that we interact with and relate with. And I think because we've been doing this for long enough, we kind of recognize that and we can kind of work with that with each other, which I think has been really valuable.
Anyone else cares to speak to that?
I think it kind of depends on what the tipping point is related to. I might have a zero tipping point for some things and a high tipping point for other things, and I think that's true for other people. And I think it could be valuable in a group to have a variety of tipping points, because then we can kind of test ourselves about, okay, should I be more concerned about this or less concerned about this?
And you can have people who have, for instance, a high tipping point for race, but a low tipping point for gender. You know, on average in the U.S., you will see flight or fight for when a community becomes more than 10% black, more than 30% Asian, although that's based on West Coast research, more than, I want to say it was 23% Latino, again based on West Coast research that came out of, it's called Whispering Vivaldi by Claude Steele. For women, when a profession becomes more than 38% female, you will begin to see fight or flight. It will stabilize usually at 49. If it doesn't stabilize at 49, it tips over and becomes female-dominated. So for instance, in Russia, most primary care doctors are women. So in engineering, for instance, they haven't even gotten to 1%. But what that means is that the men who have very low tipping points for women in a male space will try to bully, harass, and scapegoat female engineers. I am one of 9 female military historians in the entire world. That means some guys lose it when I step on a base. You know? Because their tipping point for gender is 0. So you can have a high tipping point for one group and a low tipping group point for a different group. It's not something that's across the board. Well, all right, so that's from housing research, that usually the people with the lower tipping points will flee. For instance, with black people at 10%, which means the percentage in the neighborhood has just gone up. The people with the next highest tipping point will flee. So using Chicago as an example, if you're looking at Hyde Park, it stabilized at 49%. So you had whites who were still comfortable at 51%, but all of the ones who were comfortable below that had left. Whereas if you go south, going towards Naperville, you have some where you didn't have enough whites who were comfortable at the 49%. So it tipped completely over. I'm trying to think of there's a date line for, oh, it's not Palatine. I'm trying to think of the name of the suburb. One of those, it tipped completely to be, I think now it's 83% black. And it did that with across a space of about, the tipping started in 1998. By 2008, it had moved from being more than 80% white to being more than 80% black. So as people move out, then you have the points go up and some points will get triggered. Does this make sense? I mean, even here in Eau Claire, we get it. I still remember one article came out about me 2 or 3 years ago, and someone in the comment said, yeah, all these blacks are running Eau Claire. You have to understand that black people, if you take out the people in the jail, we are like I just looked at the last census numbers, 0.87. We don't make it to 1%. But it had gone up enough that one person was tipped. Oh, they're losing it. They're losing it because it's, visibility also tends to breach a tipping point. Does that make sense? And that's why grouping people sometimes breach a tipping point, and that some people will say, I can handle them one-on-one, but I can't handle them in groups. And they'll talk about teenagers this way, they will talk about gender differences this way, they will talk about racial differences this way. I had a dean, I'm not going to say the names to protect the guilty. He was okay with indigenous people. He was not okay with mom and not okay with blacks. But he saw himself as very liberal and non-racist in everything. But because of his tipping point, he literally could not see discrimination happening in front of him to one of the other two groups. And that comes from Fegans and Sykes' research. If your tipping point has been breached, these people literally will not see discriminatory actions happening in front of them. They will use that racialized lens to explain it away. That's the people who try to say George Floyd deserved it, who will say that it didn't, they didn't see it. So we have one more quick exercise. So I'm asking you to fill this in again, because we have to start thinking about who is it we're working with and how. So fill in both parts. I'm giving you 10 minutes, but do it off the top of your head. Do it off the top of your head. Nope, not family. No family, no spouses. So I want you to get in your groups and think peer share again. Look at who you are mentoring and start thinking about what characteristics they have in common. Why are they the ones who you are mentoring? You can't disrupt institutional systems until you see yourself in them. Does this make sense? So I want to help you figure out how to see yourself in the systems. So look at who you're mentoring and think about the things they have in common. Why are you mentoring them? For instance, when I did this with some English professors, we had to push them to think about who is it you're writing these student-faculty collaborations with? And they were people who were just like them. Introverts, but who had approached them. And one of the things we had to start pushing those faculty to do was to approach the students instead of waiting for the students to approach them. Is this making sense? So think beyond the page. Why are you choosing these people to mentor and support? Think, pair, share, 5 minutes.